As Britain was fighting its way out of German military dominance during the last stages of World War II, the Minister of Aircraft Production, Lord Brabazon of Tara, created a singular group with a particular objective. The Brabazon Committee was tasked with planning the needs of Britain's post-war civilian aircraft market, and its members issued 5 different types of aircraft, including one that could carry 100 passengers in transatlantic routes from the United Kingdom to the United States. A winner eventually emerged, and it was called the Bristol Brabazon, in honor of the man who had developed the specification. The revolutionary and colossal aircraft resembled a B-17 bomber with its 230-foot wingspan and over 177 feet of length, and included separate sleeping compartments, dressing rooms, and even a cinema. Still, the Brabazon had fierce competition from other alternatives and was a highly expensive model. These were only a few of the many hurdles it had to overcome to earn its rightful place in history. Winning and losing the fight. When World War II broke out in 1939 after the Wehrmacht invaded Poland, the United Kingdom and France declared war against Hitler's Germany. At first, they thought it would be easy to subjugate the Germans, as the French had the most numerous ground army in the world and the United Kingdom had the most powerful navy. That had to count for something, after all. However, the Allied nations quickly regretted it when they got a taste of what the smaller German armed forces were capable of achieving with adequate coordination. Almost a year after the French and British went to war, their armies were cornered and destroyed under the audacity of the Blitzkrieg doctrine. Then, in June of 1940, the French army surrendered when the Germans reached Paris. Only weeks later, the British Expeditionary Force was cornered and routed at Dunkirk. Suddenly, the vast British Empire was fighting the war alone, and it began losing the fight earlier than expected. During the following months, the British High Command, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill, believed there was no way out if the United States did not join the effort. However, the US eventually joined the Allied forces in December of 1941 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese Army. With this new ally on hand, the tide of the war began to change piece by piece, and by December of 1942, Britain was confident enough to win the war in the long run. With this in mind, Churchill and other British officers began prioritizing Britain's post-war aviation industry, including basic commercial aviation needs and the most effective ways through which a new aircraft industry could serve the Empire and the Commonwealth. The Brabazon Committee. Upon further planning, Winston Churchill approached John Moore Brabazon, 1st Baron Brabazon of Tara, to lead the effort and study the unique post-war strategy. Brabazon was an experienced aviator and an expert in the aircraft industry. He was acquainted with the pioneers of the aviation industry, the Wright brothers, and had also cooperated with Charles Rolls of Rolls-Royce. When the war broke out, Lord Brabazon was appointed Minister of Transport and Minister of Aircraft Production, as he had the required experience to back up the positions. Brabazon was up to date with the British aircraft industry, and he understood that the country had decided to dedicate itself to producing combat aircraft while outsourcing most of its transport aircraft to American manufacturers. This utter abandonment of commercial aviation would put the British aviation industry at a disadvantage once the war came to an end. Lord Brabazon's first action was to establish a special committee to deal with this post-war matter following his conversations with Churchill. It would simply be called the Brabazon Committee, and its objective was simple: to investigate and forecast the post-war civil aviation requirements of the United Kingdom. The select members of the committee met for the first time on Christmas Eve of 1942 to begin working on their post-war strategy. During these days, an article from the British magazine Flight concluded that, quote, "The whole British Empire at the present time has an operational fleet of transport aircraft, comprising conversions, makeshifts, and cast-offs, totally inadequate to represent the Empire in serving the air routes of the world in the peace to come. Have we to rely upon other nations to do it for us? The British aircraft industry is equal to the task. The government should decide this vital question at once." One of the committee's main concerns was to investigate the demand for transatlantic flights between the United Kingdom and the United States to develop the appropriate aircraft for this type of journey. While they discussed these matters, the Germans and the Soviets were engaged in the brutal hand-to-hand fighting of the Battle of Stalingrad, which would ultimately stop Hitler's plans to take over the Soviet Union. The Brabazon Committee delivered a highly detailed report until mid-1943, and it called for the construction of several aircraft designs that had been thoroughly analyzed. The Type 1 was conceived as a long-range aircraft for the transatlantic route. Type 2 would be an economical airplane like the American Douglas DC-3 for European flights. Type 3 was designed to be a 4-engine medium-sized plane for UK routes. Type 4 would be a jet-propelled airplane for transatlantic mail services, and Type 5 was conceived as a twin-engine regional airliner with 14 seats. The most ambitious of all was the Type 1, a 100-ton, 8-engine airliner with a capacity for 100 passengers and an estimated range of 5,500 miles. It was also the chosen one, and the next step was to select the aircraft manufacturer that would build it. The Bristol Brabazon. The Bristol Aeroplane Company was chosen to build a prototype because it was already working on large bomber designs with similar specifications as the Type 1, and it immediately began working on the preliminary plans without disrupting its current wartime aircraft production. In November of 1944, just months after the invasion of Norway, Bristol issued its final concept for the Type 1, or Bristol Brabazon 167, as it was referred to. The aircraft would be 177 feet long, with a 230-foot wingspan and an estimated weight of 130 tons fully loaded. The giant airplane was going to be powered by 8 Bristol Centaurus 18-cylinder radial engines, each able to generate over 2,650 horsepower. The paired engines had their drive shafts angled towards an enormous central gearbox, and all of the flight controls had to be hydraulically powered. To save valuable weight, the airframe would be powered with a stressed skin made of light alloy metal sheets. The Brabazon was meant to carry wealthy people across the Atlantic, which translated into luxurious interiors and never-before-seen airplane commodities. The long trips from the United Kingdom to the United States had to be as comfortable as possible, so passengers were provided with comfortable seats with plenty of legroom, separate sleeping compartments, a cinema, a dining room, cocktail bar, and even dressing rooms. The Brabazon was also designed with a 25-feet diameter fuselage with full-length upper and lower decks to meet these luxurious requirements. If the team managed to take the revolutionary aircraft to the skies, it would become the largest British airplane ever to do so by then. Change of plans. Preparing the location where the Brabazon would be built was a feat of its own, and it ended up being a building that covered about 8 acres. Meanwhile, a village battered by the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain was demolished to build an 8,000-foot-long runway to test the aircraft. As the war slowed down and the Allies approached Berlin in early 1945, Bristol kept making progress on the Brabazon. Then, in December of 1945, Bristol Chief Test Pilot Bill Pegg was invited by Convair to fly their B-36 Peacemaker in preparation for the upcoming test flights. The Brabazon was fully completed in 1947, but 2 years of ground tests were required before clearing to fly for the first time. By then, the project had already cost over 12 million British pounds, and given its sheer weight, many believed that it would be impossible to get the Brabazon off the ground, but they were wrong. On September 4th, 1949, just a decade after World War II started, 10,000 spectators witnessed the Brabazon take off, with Bill Pegg at the helm. Witnesses even heard him exclaim, quote, "Good God, it works." During the test flight, the Brabazon achieved a top speed of 300 miles per hour and a rate of climb of 750 feet per minute. The biggest British aircraft ever built made it to the newspapers around the globe, and many airlines were immediately attracted. However, the aircraft's impact quickly vanished. Although its level of luxury was unique, airliners promptly concluded that it would not be a commercial success, as only a tiny sector of the population would be able to afford it. At the time, travel costs were falling, and it was becoming a challenge to make a profit. In other words, the market for the Brabazon was almost non-existent. The aircraft was briefly used for demonstration flights and grounded in 1952, only to be scrapped later. However, not all was lost. The facilities constructed to build the Brabazon were used by Bristol from then on, and other aircraft proposed by the Brabazon Committee became a success, such as the Vickers Viscount and the de Havilland Dove. In addition, the Brabazon made history as the largest and most luxurious aircraft that the English ever built. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels to find more exciting historical content. And let us know in the comments below what you think of the never-before-seen level of luxury of the Brabazon.